D&D number 12, Feed My Sheep, in Jesus' name, chapter 16. It is still November 29th. It's 4 p.m. Friday evening, the Tanner home, Pine Forest, Georgia. Rose stood in her and Violet's room looking at herself in the full-length mirror. She wrinkled up her nose as she turned back and forth. Violet came out of the bathroom. "What's wrong, Rose? It looks really cute." Rose sighed. "But is it really me?" Violet laughed. "Good grief, Rose. What are you talking about?" She shrugged. "Well, it has ruffles at the shoulder and at the hem. I'm really not the ruffly type, you know." "And why aren't you? Because you ride and shoot and climb ladders and trees and play ball?" "Well, maybe." "Well, pretend it's my dress. Would you like it for me?" "Well, yes. I like ruffles. I just don't know if they match my personality." "You like ruffles, Rose? Then wear ruffles. That is your personality, the fact that you don't like being put in a box. Don't put yourself in a box. Ruffles are feminine, and you are feminine. Not all the time, but some of the time. So wear them. I think you look really pretty." Violet looked her sister over. The dress was definitely feminine. It was a frothy, rose-colored confection with ruffles at the sleeves, and the material crisscrossed over her breasts and tied at her waist, a tiny bow off to one side. Then down that side was the full split skirt that divided about mid-thigh and came to just above her knees, and that bottom ruffle started at the split and covered the entire hem. It was utterly feminine. Rose nodded as she turned to see the back. "Okay, then I guess I'll wear it." She looked at her sister. "Oh, wow, Vi. You look gorgeous." Violet smiled. "Thanks. I saw this dress and I couldn't resist. I couldn't resist because of the violets." Rose looked her over. Vi, too, had ruffles. Hers ran along the neckline of a white dress covered with tiny purple violets. The dress hugged her body and then had 2 tiers of ruffles that ended just above the knee. She wore white boots, and her long blonde hair was up in a messy bun with little wisps coming down around her face. Rose's phone buzzed, and she scooped it up off her dresser, looked at the number, and frowned. Well, she did say for him to call after 4 p.m., and it was 4:15. "Record this," she said to Violet. Violet nodded, and Rose hit the button and put it on speaker. "Hello, Mike." "Hey, gorgeous. I wish you would stop calling me that." "Why? It's true." "You are one gorgeous chick." Violet rolled her eyes and Rose sighed. "So, you said you would call to tell us about the shoot, when and where." "I've decided to do it along Main Street in a few days, as soon as they get all their decorations up. I'll call again when I have the exact time." "Did you ask the mayor about that?" "I'm a pro, Rose, so of course I did. I admit, though, he gave his okay because you and your sisters are part of the Tanner family." "Whatever. And I've spoken with the Main Street Market owner." What a dumb hick. But his wife understood how important it would be to their business to say that they carry Twin Wave beauty products. Rose sighed. "Darnell Burton is not a dumb hick. He's an Army vet who served his country and came home with a brain injury. Things are a little harder for him, but he works it out and gets things done. We're all grateful that his father was able to turn the store over to Darnell. And he's a super good guy with a wife and kids. And I have to say that I just hate your condescending attitude. When are you going to learn how to treat people?" "I know how to treat you," he said provocatively. "You have proven, Mike, that you really know nothing about me. So tell me, are you really into that overgrown cowboy?" "I already told you he's not a cowboy, and how I feel about him is none of your business." "Well, I don't like him." "Well, I don't care, and you'd better get used to him because he'll be there at the shoot." "I didn't give you permission to bring someone to the shoot." "I don't need your permission. It's in the contract." "Where?" "The part about us having someone on hand to look after our interest and protect us from harm." "Well, that's a stretch." "It's in the contract, Jericho. And it's in the contract. Jericho, an EMS specialist, will be there to look after my interests. And by the way, Agent Blackman will be there to look after Violet's. It doesn't matter. I'm not interested in either you or Violet. Rose eyed her sister, trying not to laugh. But that Daisy, she is sexy as hell. Rose's eyes narrowed. Don't you dare talk about my little sister like that, you pig, or you're going to lose your contract. If we feel threatened or unsafe in any way, the contract is null and void. Actually, you know what? I hope you do continue to talk like that, because I'd love an excuse to not have to work with you ever again. You do that and I'll fix it so that you'll never model again. Rose snorted. Neither I nor my sisters care about that at all. But just know, if we wanted to model, we would. We don't need your little rinky-dink company, and you're the one who'd better be careful, because I have the power to hurt you bad, Mike. You have no idea how powerful I am, and how a word from me to the Lees and the Kinos and my father will end your career, and might even end you. As a matter of fact, the only reason we'll honor the contract is because we don't want Twin Wave Beauty to suffer here at the holidays. We're doing it for them, not for you. But keep it up, and they can sue you for loss of revenue. Violet nodded her head, her eyes dancing. Mike sighed. I know you think that. Well, if you're dumb enough to test me, you go ahead. He sighed heavily. Anyway, I'll be in touch with an exact date and time, but we'll say tentatively Wednesday, December 4th. The shoot will be around 10 in the morning, so you girls will have to be at the Main Street Market by 8. Let me know if that changes. Goodbye, Mike. Before he could say anything else, she hung up. Oh, he just makes me so mad. How can I have misjudged his character so poorly? Let me turn off the recording, Violet answered. Rose grinned. Oh, sorry. AirDrop me that file, please. You got it, sis. New scene. Daisy came downstairs and peeked out the window. She didn't see Brody coming yet. Well, sweet girl, you look absolutely beautiful. Daisy turned at her father's voice. Hey, Daddy. Thank you. You look really nice yourself. He straightened his tie and nodded. Thanks. So did you get everything straight today? I mean, with work and all? He nodded. Yes. Can I ask what happened? He shook his head. It's better if you don't know. I'm not a child. No, I can see that. He sighed. Okay, so someone lost their life, and one of our agents was responsible, and another of our agents was injured and taken hostage when they saved the client, and one of our sharpshooters finally took out the bad guy. Is that enough information? Daisy's eyes teared. I guess you were right. It's better if I don't know. I was right. I'm going to write a memo to the whole family. Very funny, Daddy. He got serious and looked her over. Honey, you really do look all grown up and very beautiful. I hate to see my girls all growing up so quickly. He took a seat in the chair in the living room as Daisy went to peek out the window again. Are you expecting someone? Yes, sir. Brody's coming over and he's going to ride with me to the Kinos. He sighed and nodded. So, this thing between you and Brody, how serious is it? I don't know. He patted his lap. Come sit here like you used to and tell me all about it. She sat in her father's lap and leaned her head against his chest. She sighed. This is nice. Yes, it is. The last time you did this was after the senior prom and your date dropped you off and went to a big party. She sighed. And I couldn't go, and I was crying and talking about how stupid it looked to the other kids and how mad I was at you. But you know what, Dad? I'm really glad you wouldn't let me go. Who knows what would have happened? You were protecting me and teaching me, and I'm really grateful that you had the strength to do that, even knowing that I would be mad at you. He smiled and rubbed his hand over her back. Well, when we love someone, sometimes the things we have to do to help them is difficult. So, tell me, Daisy, about things between you and Brody. Well, Daddy, I don't even know what to say. We had a long talk. He told me he's had his eye on me since we were little kids. He says He sees me. He sees me, not Lily, not my sisters, but me. And for some reason, when he told me that, I realized that he was aware that I needed to hear that. He told me I was unique. So he's about to graduate college. Why has he waited so long to tell you all this? Well, he said at first he was too shy, and he thought since I was a little older than him that I probably wouldn't be interested anyway. And then he said he compared every girl he met to me, and it ruined him for everyone. He said he had a long talk with his father, who gave him the courage to talk to me. And he tried at the wedding, but I was too busy. He did ask me to dance, though, and that was nice. And this time he made it a point to speak to you. Yes. And we had a long talk, and he told me how he feels, and he asked if I would let him take me out so we could get to know each other, and I said yes. Except you live in 2 different states. Right. But he's going to try to come down the week after Christmas and spend some time with me, and I haven't told him yet, but if things work out, I might travel up to Tennessee to see some of his games. I see. He rubbed her back. So, Daisy, tell me what you think of him. I mean, beside him being what you girls call a hottie. She giggled. Oh, well, it was kind of weird, Dad. Once I knew how he thought of me, it was like my heart opened. Either I began to feel things or I wanted to feel things. But Daddy, he's so kind. He's very mature. He loves God. He tries hard to do what God wants him to do, which means he tries hard to listen and know God's will for him. He's a hard worker. He loves his family. He honors his mother and sister. He loves his father. But most of all, Daddy, he sees me. Her voice choked on the emotion and she dabbed at her eyes. I've always felt like such a nobody. What, baby girl? I have always loved you, always. Oh, I know. You didn't make me feel that way, like a nobody. I just did it all on my own. It was how I thought of myself. I was not only a twin, but I was the second born of the second set of twins. It wasn't like I was, woe is me, nobody loves me, but I was like, I'm not special, I'm just me. But when Brody talked to me, Daddy, he made me feel like I was special, like I was someone important. Keegan nodded, thinking that was a point for Brody. Well, that's because you are, baby girl, and I'm glad he helped you to see that. He put both his arms around her and held her tight, and he sighed. You know, it's hard on me to see my little girls grow up and hear them talk about their possible mates. Sometimes I wish that we could go back 10, 20 years and live them all over again. Me too, Daddy. Well, some of the things we can leave out, like Gabe getting kidnapped. He chuckled. That was hard. But we can't leave that out. That is God honing that boy into a warrior. So you're saying it was God who made the girl kidnap Gabe? No. But God allowed it, and he used it, and Gabe came out of that fire stronger and more faithful. Daisy nodded and then looked up as her sisters all came downstairs at the same time. She stood up off her father's lap. Sorry, Heather said. Did we interrupt a father-daughter moment? Yes, but that's okay, my little flowers, Keegan answered. Come stand over here so I can see how beautiful you all are. They paraded in front of him. He looked them over with a smile. Heather wore a pale purple dress that was like a cable knit sweater and form-fitting. Her athletic body made it stunning on her, though Keegan wasn't sure if he liked that. Rose wore a very feminine rose-colored dress, which he really liked. Violet also wore a very soft feminine dress with little purple flowers on it. Lily wore a burnt orange-colored dress with a bouquet of white lilies printed on it. Her dress had little short sleeves and hung loosely to her knees. And Daisy's dress, like Violet's, was white, but instead of being covered with tiny purple flowers, it had one large daisy in the middle. And instead of being loose and feminine, it fit her body closely. She too wore the white boots. He sighed. Brody was going to appreciate her outfit. Keegan put a smile on his face. My girls, you are absolutely lovely, almost as beautiful as your mother. Aw, they all said in appreciation of his remark. Me too, Daddy, Iris said as she came down the stairs. Mommy fixed my hair and Violet found my princess crown, and I forgot what it was called, but Mommy fixed it in my hair so it won't come loose. And how do I look, Daddy? He looked over her frothy confection of purple and white, paired with black patent leather shoes with white tights. You look like a real princess, and it's called a tiara. Oh, yeah, a tiara. Close enough, he mumbled. He scooped her up. Is Mommy about ready? Yes. She said she had to feed the babies one more time. He nodded just as there was a knock on the door. Daisy smoothed her hair and opened the front door. Two guys stood there, Brody and Jericho. Daisy smiled. Hi, guys. Don't you two look very handsome? Brody had to clear his throat. Hello, Daisy. Wow. Wow, you look amazing. She blushed. Thank you. Y'all come in. Rose smoothed her dress as she watched Jericho come in the door. Their eyes met immediately, and he smiled, and she smiled back. Rose, he said softly, you are absolutely beautiful. She smiled. Thanks. His eyes traveled to her midsection, and she giggled, knowing he was looking to see if she had her gun tucked in there somewhere. He turned to Keegan, as did Brody. Hello, guys, Keegan said as he stood and offered his hand. He shook Jericho's hand first. Sir, nice to see you as always. You too, Jericho. Keegan immediately turned to Brody. Brody, Keegan said. I've known you a long time, young man, but it's very nice to see you in this particular capacity. Brody swallowed hard and nodded. Thank you, sir. It's very nice to be here in this particular capacity, he said, making everyone chuckle. There was another knock on the door, and this time Violet answered, and she opened the door to let CJ enter the room. Violet, you look amazing, he murmured. Thanks, CJ. You look really nice, too. CJ immediately came to Keegan. Sir, I hope everything turned out down in Mobile. He nodded. Our guy is going to be okay, and the client is safe. Well, thank goodness. Thank God, Keegan said. Jericho stepped forward to shake CJ's hand. Hey, CJ, it's nice to see you, he said. CJ nodded and shook his hand. Rose watched, trying to understand CJ's mindset after what Jericho told her, and it hit her. He wasn't mad at Jericho. He was ashamed. CJ then turned and shook Brody's hand. Another knock on the door brought Nolan into the mix, and he too exclaimed how beautiful Heather looked, and then added in how the other girls look amazing. He shook his father-in-law-to-be's hand, and then he asked a question that got the ball rolling. So, who's riding with Heather and I? Me, Iris chanted. And Lily, you have to ride with me. Lily smiled. Okay, little flower, I'll ride with you. Good, Keegan said with a nod. Well, I'm going to go up and help Lizzie. We'll be there shortly. Taylor called Lizzie, and we have to make a quick stop, but we'll see you all there. Oh, and Heather, get Iris's car seat out of my car. Will do. Who knows the way? Nolan asked. Well, all of us girls do, Rose answered, so see you there in about 5 minutes. New scene. It's still November 29th. It is 5:30 p.m. Friday evening. Kino Plantation House, Pine Forest, Georgia. They'd toured the entire home and had now walked across the side yard to one of the outbuildings. This was the third group. The first one was mostly the women and led by Bree. The second was mostly the men and led by Ricky. This one was mostly young people and led by young Eric and Taylor and Gabe and Jordan, repeating the information that they'd learned just a little earlier. Everyone had fallen in love with the giant home and beautiful surroundings. The old trees, the small lake, the swing around under the tree, the fields as far as one could see. Jericho was trying hard to pay attention to what young Eric was saying. So I'm told that this building used to be where they would pull the guest carriages in. The residents had a separate carriage house attached, which is no longer here, and the original owners of this plantation grew rice, indigo, and eventually cotton and sugarcane. This was one of the largest plantations, originally over 700 acres, and yes, they did own slaves. There are still some of the slave quarters about a half a mile that way. He pointed across the fields. The plantation owner's name was Ellis, and they were one of the richest plantation owners in Middle Georgia, and we know that because there are horse stalls included in the carriage house, and even quarters for the coachman, which was only how the most wealthy operated. Jericho wasn't listening. He had his eyes on the most beautiful girl in the world. Rose was so lovely in that pink dress, though when he'd called it pink, he was told that it was a dusky rose color. As he moved and turned the light layers of As she moved and turned, the light layers of fabric would shift around her, showing parts of her thigh, and that was making his mouth go dry. He needed to touch, so he reached out and took her hand gently in his. She turned her head and smiled at him. He motioned toward the horse stalls with a questioning look on his face, and she smiled and nodded, and he pulled her around the corner. The stalls were completely empty, of course, though a bit dusty. Jericho pressed her up against the dusty wall, and with her hand still in his, he braced his hand against the wall just above her head. Just above her head. He leaned forward and kissed her. He pulled away, breathing hard. I am sorry, but I thought if I didn't do that right now, I was going to die. She gave a soft laugh. Anything else you just need to do? His eyes grew dark. Yes, but that will have to wait. Still, he reached down to the split in her dress and grabbed her leg just under her knee and pulled it up against his thigh and leaned against her and kissed her again. This time she gave a soft moan, which encouraged him to kiss her several more times, and when he pulled away, they both were breathing hard. He shook his head. I'm sorry. She sighed. Jericho, don't be sorry. I have to tell you that, well, I mean, the way you make me feel, no one has ever made me feel that way. I'm glad to hear that. How many? How many? How many guys have kissed you? How many am I up against? I've kissed a few guys. I had a few high school boyfriends, but honestly, Jericho, they never made me feel anything except maybe curious as to why kissing and stuff was such a big deal. I tried to feel it, like with a guy I dated briefly in college, and I tried hard to feel it with Mike because he said I was prudish. You're not a prude. He just wasn't man enough to make you feel what you're supposed to feel. And what am I supposed to feel? He breathed deep. Like you would give me anything. Her mouth opened. Oh, did I shock you this time? No, it's just that you just described how I feel when you kiss me. He stepped back, breathing hard again and shaking his head. Did I just shock you? He smiled as he drew a deep breath. Maybe. I'm just trying to get myself under control. Oh, she smiled. He shook his head in wonder. I love how honest you are. Is there any other way to be? He pulled her away from the wall and cupped her face in his hand. You, Rose, are absolutely the most amazing woman I've ever met. I adore you, and I'm going to fight to win your heart. You do that, Jericho, but it won't be much of a fight. He smiled and kissed her, and they headed back to join the group who'd started back toward the house. As soon as the group came back to the house, Iris came running. Gabe, Taylor, which is the princess room? Gabe scooped her up. Wouldn't you like to know? She giggled. Yes. Well, you're going to have to be patient because dinner is ready, and you have to eat your food first. She frowned. Gabe raised an eyebrow at her, and she didn't protest. Ricky Kino spoke to the crowd of people. Welcome, everyone, to our new Georgia home. We're so happy and excited to be able to say that. My father met Shelley here in Georgia. My wife grew up in Georgia. My brothers were born in Georgia. The Apples made Georgia their home 20-some-odd years ago, and the Stewarts are born and raised in Georgia, except Lisa. but she was conceived right here in Pine Forest and found her way back home. Carol was born and raised in Georgia. Lizzie was born and raised in Georgia, and so were all of her children, and the Murphys were all born and raised in Georgia. It just seemed fitting that we have a home near the people that we consider our family. You are welcome here anytime, and we're so happy to be able to have you all over for dinner tonight. We have 55 people here tonight, and each of the 3 dining tables will seat 18, so that is 54. But we added a chair to the end of the table, so everyone will have a seat. Of course, this doesn't include the 5 tiny new babies. Anyway, if you'll just serve yourselves at the buffets and sit where you want, that would be great. Bree, do you want to tell them what they're eating? Bree smiled. Well, first, let me just say that I only did what the chef told me to do. Ms. Jewel Brooks, Jordan's mom, is the chef, responsible for this amazing meal. She's been working at it all day, and we both have to say thank you to the inn for letting us borrow some cooking supplies and pans and utensils, etc. So Jewel has prepared for us seared venison backstrap, lobster ravioli, purple sweet potato medallions, grilled peach, green bean, and feta salad, caramel cake, red velvet cake, and her famous oatmeal chocolate chip cookies. I'm so grateful for her talent. Let's all give her a hand. Bree waited until they quieted and smiled at her husband. Back to you, Ricky. Okay then, Dad, if I may call on you to bless the food. No. No? Grandmaster Kino smiled. Well, don't think I don't appreciate the honor and respect you're showing to me by asking me to pray, Rick. But this is the first meal in your new home. Your new home. And I think it only fitting that you say the blessing tonight, son. Your respect for me is duly noted. Ricky nodded. Very well, then. I'll say the blessing. Everyone bowed their heads. Some held hands, and Ricky prayed a beautiful, humble, powerful prayer, blessing the food and the people in the house and the grounds, and asking God to renew and reestablish the entire property to a place of light and love and goodness and righteousness. The food was amazing, and many adulations were heaped upon Jewel. The conversations taking place were delightful, as is always expected when this dynamic group of people get together. There happened to be 18 young adults. Grace Nash and her brother Brody Smith, Lena Apple, and Heather and Nolan, and Rose and Jericho, Violet and CJ, Lily, Daisy, Gabe and Taylor, young Eric and Jordan, JoJo and Logan, and Peyton Murphy. So they all sat at one table. Young Eric, Jordan, Heather, Nolan, and Milena discussed possible wedding dates and plans. Grace and Logan discussed music and possibly doing an album together and what songs they would write or cover for it. Daisy and Brody shared their own softly spoken conversation about when they might be able to see each other. And Violet and CJ too spoke quietly to each other. Rose and Jericho discussed his future plans for his company and her Christmas plans for the center. And Gabe and Taylor and Peyton and JoJo talked sports. It was Taylor who noticed that Lily was sitting quietly, just watching and listening. Lily, Taylor began, are you still thinking about opening a diner or a restaurant in Pine Forest? Probably, she answered. Right now my first loyalty is to the inn, but I guess I'll eventually make the transition. Find a location, train someone at the inn, though I may still oversee everything. It was Miss Maddie and the inn that gave me my start, so I wouldn't leave them unless they're fully taken care of. Taylor nodded. That makes sense. You know, my dad has invested in several restaurants, and they always do really well. He knows what he's doing. You should talk to him about it. He could probably help you develop a plan. He's helping Miss Brooks open her restaurant. That's awesome. She's so good. So are you, Taylor said. Just ask anyone who's eaten at the inn lately. You are good, Lily. She smiled. Thanks, Taylor. And you are a sweetheart. Gabe smiled, because she definitely was a sweetheart and may one day be Lily's sister-in-law. When dinner was over, Bree allowed everyone to clear their place, but refused help in the kitchen. It was Shelley who had the guts to argue with her daughter. You are not going to do the dishes for over 50 people while I stand idly by, so just move over. Thank you, Shelley, Bree said, 'cause I didn't want to have to get rude with my sister-in-law. Me neither, Bella said. You're pregnant. Go sit down. Bella's eyebrows rose. I am not incapacitated, so move over. And there's no way you can keep me from helping, Jody said. Or any of us, all the young women said. So it ended up that Bree allowed them all to pitch in, and in only 30 minutes the entire kitchen and dining room was spotless. Tiny babies were nursed, and the group had moved into the ballroom, or what Iris had been told is the princess room. Logan got to the piano first and began to play. Then Grace sat down next to him, and they jammed for a few minutes while Taylor videoed live stream for Gabe's website. Then JoJo took Taylor's phone and videoed her and Gabe dancing to the song that they danced to on America Can Dance as Grace and Logan played it. That got everyone to beg Miss Carol to dance with Toby. What dance would you like? She asked. How about a waltz? Brody called out. Waltzes weren't Logan's specialty, but there was a concert pianist right here in the room, so everyone begged Violet to play the piano. She sat and played a waltz, and then a rumba, and then a dozen other requests. Caroline and Toby were mesmerizing. Even better, Carol got all the little ones up to dance, boys and girls. All the girls were now wearing tiaras because Taylor, thoughtful as always, had asked Mrs. Tanner to stop and pick up some birthday party tiaras at the store so that all the little girls could be princesses and not just Iris. The room was full of light, just as Ricky had prayed. The girls who were a little older, Sophia and Erilyn, wore the tiaras given them and said they were the queens. And Iris and Angelina and Emily and Kelston were the princesses. And Josie and Taylor led the girls to dance in a big circle. And Gabe and young Eric rounded up the little boys, Manny, Nate, Noah, Abe, and Ledger, to be princes who were warriors. 8-year-old Jamie, however, was having none of it, at first, until Matt Stewart moved forward and took Josie's hands and began to dance with her. A man needs to learn how to dance, young Eric told Jamie, and finally he too got out on the floor. They all were having a splendid time. CJ moved to stand behind Violet. He leaned down to whisper in her ear, Violet, every time you play, it sends chills all over me. You are so talented, sweetheart. She swallowed the lump in her throat and forced herself to smile up at him. Continuing on for several more tunes, she started on Unchained Melody, and CJ placed his hands on her shoulders, and she couldn't help it. The tears came to her eyes. Her breath started coming harder, as if she'd been running. He put his lips near her ear. Are you okay? What's wrong, babe? She caught Grace's eyes and motioned to her to come close. Grace came immediately, concern on her face. Can you take over for me? Violet asked. Grace nodded and slid in beside her. Here, sweetie, go ahead. Maybe get some air. Violet nodded and rose from the piano. She turned to CJ. What's wrong, Vi? She sniffed. We need to talk. He drew a deep breath. You want to go for a walk? She nodded. CJ went to get her coat and then stopped by to speak with Keegan. Mr. Tanner, I'm going to take Violet out for a walk. She says she needs to talk. Keegan nodded with understanding. Ricky also nodded. Well, don't go out on the property. We haven't been over it yet and don't know what dangers are out there. Well, maybe walk down the front drive, CJ asked. Ricky nodded. Yeah, that'd be better for now. CJ took the coat to Violet and helped her put it on. What's going on? Rose came to ask immediately. She wants to talk, CJ said quickly. Rose nodded and smiled encouragingly at her sister. CJ opened the front door and ushered Violet outside. He took her hand and walked her down the wide concrete steps and smiled kindly. Okay, babe, I'm listening. She nodded and drew a deep breath. I need to tell you what happened in New York. Okay. I was 18. I worked so hard in high school to maintain a 4.0 GPA. I seemed to have a knack for the piano. It just came naturally to me. And I ate, slept, and dreamed piano. I intended to study music in college, and a friend of mine suggested that I apply to Juilliard in New York. I actually laughed at her. Juilliard says they have like a 7% admission rate, but it's actually more like a 5%. I applied, almost as a joke. She turned to look at CJ with a smile. I almost passed out when I got accepted. I couldn't believe it. I was so honored, so excited, so naive, she added sadly. It's expensive, but my father was willing to foot the bill because I was so excited. And neither him nor my mom wanted me to go so far away. Small town country girl up in the New York jungle. But after a trip or two up there, I convinced him that I'd be okay. I'd be living in the residence hall on campus. I would be okay. She became silent as she thought about what to say. And so, I guess that didn't end up the case? CJ asked. She sighed. No. Well, at first, everything seemed to be awesome, just perfect. And one of my professors, Professor Damien Popov, he really liked me. He claimed I was the most talented student he'd ever taught. Well, that doesn't surprise me a bit. Well, it was all a lie. She winced as she tried to get the words out, and CJ put his arm around her. Go ahead, sweetheart. I got you. She drew a breath. He would come up to me while I'd be playing a piece. He'd put his hands on my shoulders, slide them down my arms, telling me I need to feel the music more, that I won't ever get better if I didn't feel the pulse of the music. He'd move his hands from my shoulders to slide down to here, my upper chest. CJ's lips pressed tightly together, but he kept quiet. I'd tell him that I was uncomfortable with that, and he'd tell me I was being prudish, and he used that word a lot. He said if I wanted to be the best, I had to feel the music. He said music was as old as time and came from the oldest rhythm there was, which was the rhythm of a man and a woman making love. He'd whisper in my ear while I'm playing, asking me to think about certain parts of my body. Her voice broke. Okay, baby. You know what? You don't have to tell me, he said quickly. She sniffed and shook her head. No, I need to get it out. All right, then. I'm listening. I almost got used to him putting his hands on me. It was never in intimate places, but always very close. One day he told me he was going to offer me something that only a few of his students ever get offered. And what was that? He asked when she went silent. Private lessons. I and only a few others would be invited to come to his apartment for private lessons. He would work with me extensively, and I would move to the top of the class very quickly. And it would be incredible because all the top students were males. But I was different. I was special, and I was the most beautiful student he'd ever had and the most talented. It was meant to be. I was going to be a big star. I was flattered. I was so dumb. Think about it now, and I realize how easy it is to see what he was doing, but I was so innocent and excited that I could make my parents and my siblings proud of me. Rose was down in Florida, going to school for marine biology, and really? I didn't know that. Violet shrugged. Well, it turns out she wasn't really that interested in it, but thought it was different and far away from me. She was always trying to be different from me, to establish her own identity. Anyway, we still spoke on a regular basis, and I called her to tell her about this amazing opportunity I'd been offered, and she was not at all happy about it. I guess she didn't see the world through the same rose-colored glasses that I did. She was immediately suspicious, and that made me mad at her. We had words, and finally I hung up on her. I had no idea that you ever fought with any of your siblings. She gave a soft laugh. Well, Rose and I love each other with every part of our soul. We're very close, but we also used to fight a lot. I mean, she was very rebellious and strong, and I was the opposite. And I irritated her, and sometimes, I admit, she irritated me. But we love each other fiercely, which is really why she and I fought. She was fiercely protective of me, and I didn't want to hear it. So, did you go to the private lessons? She sighed. Yes. And what happened? Well, nothing. At first, he taught like he always did. I learned he maybe touched me a little bit more, and he kissed my cheek when I accomplished a difficult piece, but that was it. CJ kept quiet because that obviously wasn't the end of the drama. I called Rose and told her and rubbed it in that nothing happened. But she insisted he was just biding his time and that he was grooming me and that he'd probably done this before with other students. And I was exasperated with her. I went a second time and still nothing happened except he tried to kiss me. He, he said he'd fallen in love with me. He said my light and my spirit was strong and he felt like we were meant to be together. CJ swallowed. And so he tried to kiss you. Did he accomplish it? No, I mean briefly, but I pushed him away. I explained to him that I wasn't feeling that way. And he said he understood that I was devout in my faith and he wanted me to pray about it. And he hoped and prayed with all his might that I would give him a chance. So I called Rose again and told her what he'd said. And she told me to not believe him. And I told her she just didn't think anyone could possibly love me. I was so blinded. Not blinded, Vi. It's called brainwashing. Violet nodded. Rose asked me when was the next time I was supposed to have another private lesson, and I told her the following night at 6 p.m., and then Rose hung up on me. I didn't know at the time that she immediately gathered her things and went home to Pine Forest. Back here, she went straight to Dad. The next day, I went for my private lesson again. We just went over some old stuff, trying to perfect what I was playing, and he got mad at me. He said I wasn't listening to him. He said I wasn't even trying to feel the music. She stopped and wiped tears from her eyes. He got these scarves, like these long see-through type scarves. I'm not even sure they were scarves, maybe sheer curtains. He tied one around each of my wrists and would pull on them when he felt I wasn't stroking the keys right. Then he tied one around my eyes and told me to not see but only feel the music. She stopped again, breathing hard. He put his hands on my shoulders and arms and hands and then on my face, and then he tilted my head back and tried to kiss me again, and I pulled away, she said, tears now running freely down her cheeks. And that made him mad, and he began to yell at me and tell me how lucky I am to have him teach me and how other girls appreciate it, and I should show a little appreciation too. And when I tried to get up, he grabbed me in a headlock and pulled me backward. And I remember hearing the bench tip over, and I tried to fight him, but he was squeezing off my air, and I passed out. He dragged me into his bedroom, and he used the scarves that he'd tied around my wrist to tie me to the bed. She stopped and hiccuped. CJ tried to take her in his arms, but she pushed away. I woke up and I was tied to the bed and he was kneeling over me, and I tried to scream, but he pulled the scarf that had been over my eyes down to cover my mouth and then wrapped the long ends more times around my mouth, and I finally realized what he was going to do. He was probably going to rape me and possibly kill me, and I was terrified. He pushed my skirt up, and I was so scared. And he cursed because he heard someone knocking on his door. And then the door burst open, and my father and Rose and a few other people, like police and Ameritech agents, they all came rushing into the room. They had to keep my father from killing the professor. All I can really remember after that was Rose helping to untie me and holding me so tight I could barely breathe. I cried, she cried, and we didn't let go of each other for the whole rest of the process of speaking to the police and speaking to my dad and gathering my things from the dorm and going home. She stopped and looked up at CJ, then turned and ran away about 10 feet and threw up. CJ came to her and smoothed her hair back off her forehead. Okay, honey, it's okay. I got you. I swear it's going to be okay. He reached in his pocket for a handkerchief he always carried and handed it to her. Here. She sniffed and nodded and accepted it, wiped her tears and then her mouth. Sorry, she mumbled. You have nothing to be sorry about. Violet, I'm so sorry that happened to you. Well, it was all my fault. Stop it. It was not your fault. Yes, you were naive. You were right. You were an innocent country girl. No place for you in New York. But it wasn't your fault. That guy was a predator. He took advantage of the beautiful young girls that came to him with their hopes and dreams. May I ask what happened to him? She swallowed. I went to court and testified against him, and because I did, several others did. But many of those where he actually did have relations with them, they had no proof, and he was found not guilty on those counts, and he ended up only getting 4 years. 4 years! He'll be out of jail in only 1 more year. And then I'll have access to him, CJ thought. He pulled Violet into his arms and up against his chest. Baby, it's over. I'll never let anyone hurt you again. She sniffed. CJ, I don't want to go back inside. My face is all puffy. Will you take me home? Of course, babe. Whatever you want. He took out his phone and texted his boss. Violet wants to go home. I'm going to take her there and stay with her until you guys get home. Got it. Did she come clean? Yes, sir. And I think I want to murder someone. Get in line. Violet says to ask Rose to grab her purse for her. It's by the piano. Roger that. Tell Violet that Jeffy picked up on her distress and spoke to her father, and that Grandmaster Kino wants to speak with her sometime tomorrow. Copy that. New scene. Inside the ballroom, the party continued. Brody asked Daisy to dance and was pleasantly surprised that she was a great dancer. Of course, he knew the Tanners could dance because Gabe said on his website that the reason he could dance was because he and his sisters used to put on little shows for their parents. Brody spun Daisy and dipped her, and she laughed. Carol and Toby watched them dance. Carol sighed. Brody finally seemed happy, and she knew it was him being with Daisy that made him feel that way. She was happy to see her son smile and laugh and not seem so serious. She looked over at her daughter Grace, who was currently playing the piano with her father. Sweet Grace was 25 years old and had been in 3 serious relationships, and all 3 had fallen apart when she'd let the guys know that there would be no premarital sex. 2 of them had also been Christian guys, but for some reason they believed it was okay to have sex before marriage. After all, most of the world did it. Grace had let them know that because the world did it, it didn't make it right. Grace had been the product of Carol and Toby having premarital sex. In Carol's defense, she didn't know Jesus at the time. Toby did, but he'd fallen away. He says it was her who brought him back into the fold. The return of the prodigal son. Their daughter Grace was bound and determined to do things right, and that made Caroline happy. Grace, however, seemed lonely. So she focused on her music. She opted to use her father's name, and Gracie Nash was becoming more and more known in the world of gospel/country/Christian music. Like her father, she played guitar, piano, and organ. Carol smiled as Toby rose and allowed Logan to play with Grace on the piano. They immediately went into a jive on the piano, and Brody nodded at Daisy, who smiled and nodded back, and they started to swing dance, and they were really good, though it was obvious they'd never danced this type of dance together before. The little ones went crazy, dancing and jumping around, and Gabe and Taylor were awesome. Then they split, as they were known to do since prom, and Gabe grabbed Lily to dance with him, and Taylor grabbed Logan to dance with her, and Ricky was dancing with Bree, and Shelley and Eric were dancing with their little ones. Mark was dancing with his wife, Bella, and Joey with his wife, Breeze, and young Eric was trying to get Miss Jewel to dance with him, but she was refusing, so he finally got little Josie to dance with him. And Toby stepped back to his wife and looked over the room. He noticed when Brody and Daisy stopped dancing, and his son leaned down and whispered something in Daisy's ear. Brody caught his father's eye and pointed to the back door. Toby nodded with a smile. He hoped they would be able to work out their long-distance situation. For the first time in a long time, Brody actually seemed happy. And that is the end of chapter 16.